What's going on, everybody? I'm Max Kellerman. That's JJ Redick, but you knew that. Welcome to this Just in, a fast hour around the world of sports and how I see it. And we start with three big questions for NBA Finals Game 3. It's been a rough 2 games in terms of scoring for Jason Tatum, shooting just 18% on 2-point attempts so far this series. Figure the Celtics will need superstar Tatum at some point to win the series. And speaking of a rough 2 games, Klay Thompson shooting just 30% so far, his third worst field goal percentage through the first 2 games of any playoff series in his career. How will the Celtics handle Draymond Green and his antics, for lack of a better word? Ime Udoka left it up to his players whether or not to engage or to ignore the 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. Game 3 tips off tonight on ESPN. Been a rough 2 games. Well, I already mentioned that. Brian Windhorst with me live from the NBA Finals in Boston. Windy, we just went through some of the biggest questions heading into Game 3. What's the biggest question for the Celtics?
To me, I think this game and maybe the rest of the series will hinge on the Celtics' turnovers. I know that that's not as fun of a topic as Draymond Green and physicality. I do have a little secret people seem to have forgotten. The Bucks and Heat were physical with the Celtics too, okay? This is not anything new. What is an issue for the Celtics is when they hand the ball to the opposing team or put the ball on a platter for the opposing team to take. And this is what Ime Udoka came in and talked to his team about on their off day of practice, and he made a big deal of it. 15 turnovers or less. They're 13-2 in the playoffs. 16 turnovers or more, as they were in Game 2, they are 0-5. If they hit 16 turnovers tonight, I'm just going to pack up and head to the press conference room and get ready to cover a Warriors win. Let's just run the ticker right next to the score on the score bug. I'll talk to Tim Corrigan later about it. I think I'll probably win that argument. That is 33. You know, I know everyone's going to talk about Steph, and Steph had a very nice game in Game 2. They scored 107 points. 33 of them came off of Celtics turnovers. That is a totally survivable number if you're Boston. Their half-court defense could be better, but it was fine. If they hand the ball to the Warriors, they will win tonight. If they don't hand the ball to the Warriors, the Celtics will win tonight. Everything else is going to be details.
Yeah, broadly speaking, it's good to not have a lot of turnovers. You'd rather your opponent have a lot of them, but maybe it's particularly pronounced the importance of that stat in this series. Windy, Cedric Maxwell made comments recently about how Draymond would be knocked out if he played in the 1980s. Draymond, of course, responded.
I have a huge appreciation for those guys. I saw what Cedric Maxwell said. And, you know, one thing that baffles me about the 80s or the 90s or whatever you want to call when basketball was so much more physical is some of the guys that be talking weren't the guys that was punching people. You know, like they act like, you know, guys was just walking around the court like I'm hitting this guy in the nose.
Every sport, I think in every generation, there's always this mythical era where everything was harder and things just keep getting worse and worse. JJ, what's your reaction to what Draymond said?
My reaction is like, you know, the 90s specifically was a very physical era. This was sort of the height of the hand-checking era. There was still a lot of physicality and hard fouls. We saw fights, of course, the famous Miami Heat, New York Knicks fight, which we're getting to witness one of them, not the one in the Garden where Jeff Van Gundy's grabbing Alonzo Mourning. But, you know, the 80s, I think, gets a rep for being a physical era. There were certainly some hard fouls that we saw. Kurt Rambis getting clotheslined, of course, the bad boy Pistons, which I think...
There were some fights.
Ushered it. Yeah, there were some fights. You know, I just spent 2 hours watching Game 6 of the 1987 NBA Finals. I can honestly say it was not a physical era of basketball. You know, and again, Draymond, like I say all the time, like we have such a great appreciation for the generations that came before us. They laid the groundwork for what the game is today, and the game continues to evolve. Players are always going to respond to the rules of their era. They're going to respond to the valued skill sets of their era, and that's what our era has done. We've responded to what is appropriate for our era.
I was born in 1973. I could tell you Pat Riley used to say we used to decide who we were going to defend. Like you defended one guy. Now, the bad boy Pistons and then the Knicks under Pat Riley changed that in the 90s, as you mentioned. It became more physical. Windy, will the refs look to preemptively keep a tight grip on Game 3, do you think?
Well, I think, this officiating crew is going to know that this crowd here is going to be all over every step that Draymond takes in this game. And so there's going to be a hyper awareness early on about any type of physical play. So my guess is that they will set a tone about how the game is going to be officiated in the first few minutes of the game, and then we'll move on and play basketball. I would be surprised if antics become an issue tonight. Number one, the game is too important. It's 1-1. We're fighting for whoever has the lead here. Number two, this is a very experienced officiating crew. The players in this game, particularly Draymond, are very aware of what these guys will call and not. I think we're going to move on from this physical conversation over the last 2 days and move on to straight basketball, which will play out later tonight here in the arena.
JJ, what adjustments do you think the Celtics make against Steph tonight, who was not only had the 34 in Game 1, but 29 big points in Game 2?
Yeah, look, he's been really good in the half court. The three most effective half court plays for either team in this series have been a Steph Curry pick and roll, a Steph Curry isolation, and the Steph Curry handoff. Let's start with the pick and roll. That's where I think the first adjustment can be made. They've got to bring the big up. I'm not saying it has to be an all-out blitz, but being all the way back in drop coverage has not been effective so far in this series, despite the fact that the Boston Celtics have a bunch of good perimeter defenders.
Isn't that a pick your poison kind of thing?
It is a pick your poison, because if you do end up blitzing it, or even if the big is up, which happened once in Game 2 where he threw it back to Draymond and Draymond got the and one on Al Horford, you're essentially playing 4-on-3 on the backside. The Warriors have seen this blitz all the time with Steph Curry over the years, and so they're able to pick the defense apart. But the big at least has to show some level of resistance by being up. And I don't know what you do in isolation, because Steph Curry has been the best player in the playoffs in isolation, and he was in the 96th percentile in the regular season in isolation. He's just that good.
Yeah, and by the way, speaking of antics, the real antics Draymond knows how to do is how to hold the, he sets the pick and holds Marcus Smart, and then Steph springs free, right? Windy, have the Warriors, do you think, that all that said, been overly reliant on Steph?
I would be, if I were them, I would want to get back to their motion offense where the ball is moving, players are passing and relocating. Steph is getting good shots. Jordan Poole is getting good shots. Andrew Wiggins is getting good shots. Because they have, and as JJ said, the reason they've been running a lot of that pick and roll is because it's been working. But I'm not sure that's where they're at their best. And as good as Steph has been, again, I will say, I don't think the Celtics are disappointed with what they've allowed defensively. Again, 107 points with 33 points off turnovers in Game 2. You cut that down to a manageable 18 points off turnovers, which is still not good. All of a sudden, we've got a completely different discussion. Now the Warriors are having to scramble to get to 100. So I don't think they're that upset, although I do agree with JJ. The Celtics were the number one team in the league this year switching. Nobody switched on pick and rolls more than them, and they haven't really employed that strategy against Steph, at least not yet.
Thanks, Windy. JJ, no one can do it by themselves. And I thought Poole was good in Game 2, but it was like Steph salted the game away, and then Poole scored, or just about salted it away in the third quarter. Steph needs more help when it matters, in my opinion. Klay is the guy, it looks like, who needs to get going. How do they get him going?
Well, look, he's 1 for 7 so far this series in uncontested threes. And you got to expect for his career he shoots about 50% on those shots.
Regression to the mean you're
expecting. So let's get him some more uncontested threes. Maybe that's in transition. Maybe it's off that movement set. Maybe he gets a couple layups in transition. He's got to get himself going. But history has shown, at least in this postseason series, that after games 1 and 2, he has been phenomenal. I do want to just say one thing to Windy's comments about getting back to those movement sets. What broke the game open in Game 2 was when they went to the high pick and roll with Jordan Poole and when they went to the high pick and roll with Steph Curry. Steph Curry pick and rolls for the series, 1.7 points per possession. You literally can't get a better offense than that. I'd run that until the Boston Celtics made an adjustment.
1.7 points per possession.
Well, the league best is 1.16. Like, again, why would you not run that as many times as possible until they make an adjustment?
That's unreal. It's prop quiz time. And JJ, we're going to focus on Game 3, obviously. First up, Steph, over or under 28.5 points?
I'm going to go with the over this. I do think Boston Celtics make adjustments. I just think Steph Curry is playing at an all-time level right now. And as I mentioned, even in ISO, even on dribble handoffs, he's just scoring the ball at a very efficient level against this Boston Celtics defense.
This is what I've been waiting to see in the finals from Steph. I think this is the best he's ever played in the finals. Klay, over or under 2.5 threes?
I'm going to go with over. Again, based on what we've seen so far this postseason, Klay Thompson is due and has shown that he will have these bounce-back games the further we go in the series.
Draymond, over or under 0.5 ejections, JJ?
I'm going to take the under on this, and I will say that even if, as some of this discourse the last couple days about the Boston Celtics trying to bait him into double technicals, Draymond's a smart player. He knows what has been talked about over the last 3 days. I expect him to bring a level of physicality and an edge to this game, but he's going to be smart. He's not going to get ejected.
Draymond thinks it's tough now. In the 80s, you had to fight Mike Tyson for 15 rounds before every possession. Coming up, a case where no news is actually good news. Why, or at least news, why we haven't heard anything about a Lamar Jackson contract extension. Is something weird happening in Baltimore? And will Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown be putting up big numbers tonight in Game 3? A Celtics-themed prop quiz is next.